The word embarrassment first attached itself to my name when I was 14, the Christmas I asked for a computer instead of clothes. She's going through a phase, Mom explained to relatives gathered around our dining room table, her voice carrying the patient tone reserved for discussing children's temporary delusions. All this computer nonsense will pass once she discovers boys and makeup. 15 years later, that phase had evolved into the family's most reliable source of social discomfort. While my brother Marcus built his reputation as a successful investment banker, climbing the corporate ladder with impressive precision, I remained the family member who required careful explanation at social gatherings. The one who'd never quite figured out how to translate intelligence into respectability. The pattern had been established early and reinforced consistently. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, the focus was on Marcus making varsity football. When I earned a full scholarship to MIT, the celebration centered on Marcus getting accepted to Harvard. When I graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, the family gathered to toast Marcus landing his first internship at Goldman Sachs. Each milestone in my academic journey was acknowledged politely but overshadowed by Marcus's more conventional achievements. Straight A's in advanced mathematics were impressive, but football trophies were displayed prominently on the mantelpiece. Academic honors were mentioned briefly in holiday newsletters, but Marcus's social connections were discussed extensively at dinner parties. The disconnect became more pronounced as we entered our 20s. Marcus's path was linear and comprehensible: prestigious university, recognizable company, steady promotions, appropriate marriage to Jennifer from Connecticut. Their relationship timeline followed social expectations perfectly, progressing from college dating to engagement to wedding to first child with clockwork precision. My trajectory, by contrast, defied easy categorization. Instead of pursuing traditional employment after MIT, I'd returned home to our parents' basement, claiming I needed time to work on some projects. While Marcus was impressing Goldman Sachs executives with his analytical skills, I was surrounded by servers, circuit boards, and prototype quantum processors that no one in my family understood or appreciated. "She's always been different," became Mom's standard explanation when neighbors asked about my post-graduation plans. "Very bright but not particularly practical. She'll figure things out eventually." The subtext was clear to everyone in our social circle. Emma was smart but lacked the common sense to translate academic achievement into career success. She was the kind of person who could solve complex mathematical problems but couldn't navigate basic social expectations about appropriate life choices. Marcus had always been everything our parents hoped for in a successful child. Harvard MBA, corner office at Goldman Sachs, wife from an appropriate family, house in the right neighborhood. At 32, he embodied the kind of conventional success that made sense at dinner parties and country club events. People understood his career trajectory, respected his achievements, and considered him a credit to our family's values. I, on the other hand, had become the family's ongoing disappointment. No husband, no traditional career path, no achievements that translated easily into cocktail party conversation. At 29, I was still figuring things out according to family consensus, pursuing computer-related hobbies that seemed impressive to other technical people but utterly mystifying to anyone with actual business sense. The basement laboratory that had started as a temporary workspace had evolved into a sophisticated research facility over the past 8 years. What began as curiosity about quantum mechanical principles had developed into breakthrough applications for computational processing. But explaining quantum entanglement and superposition to family members who considered basic computer literacy advanced technology proved consistently futile. "She's very dedicated to her research," Dad would tell colleagues who asked about my career progress. The word research made my activities sound more legitimate than playing with computers in the basement, though he had no clear understanding of what that research actually involved or why it might matter. This Christmas gathering was particularly well attended, with cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends filling our parents' house for their annual holiday celebration. The kind of event where family success stories were shared, professional achievements were celebrated, and social hierarchies were reinforced through careful conversation. The guest list represented our extended family's most successful members. Uncle Robert had built a regional construction company into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Aunt Patricia ran the most exclusive interior design firm in the city. Cousin David had just been promoted to partner at his law firm. These were people who measured success in terms everyone could understand: revenue, profit margins, client lists, market share. Marcus just closed a $200 million acquisition deal, Dad was explaining to our Uncle Robert as I helped Mom arrange appetizers in the kitchen. The client specifically requested him because of his reputation for handling complex international transactions. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Marcus accepting congratulations with the confident humility of someone accustomed to professional recognition. His achievements were the kind that impressed other successful people, generating respect and admiration from everyone who mattered in our social circle. The conversation around Marcus's latest triumph continued for 20 minutes, with relatives asking detailed questions about deal structure, regulatory approval processes, and the strategic implications for his clients' global expansion plans. This was the language of legitimate business success, involving measurable outcomes and comprehensible value creation. "And what about Emma?" Aunt Patricia asked eventually, her voice carrying the careful tone people used when discussing family members whose lives hadn't developed according to expectations. Dad's pause was barely perceptible, but I'd learned to recognize the slight hesitation that preceded explanations of my current situation. "She's still working with computers," he said finally, using the phrase that had become his standard description of my activities. "Doing some kind of technical consulting work. She's very good with that sort of thing." The phrase, "that sort of thing," had become his diplomatic way of acknowledging my work without having to explain what it actually involved. For the past 8 years I'd been building and scaling technology companies, but the details were too complicated for family conversations and the results too unconventional to fit their understanding of proper careers. "Is she seeing anyone?" Aunt Patricia continued, following the predictable script of concerned relatives addressing family disappointments. "She's very focused on her work right now," Mom replied diplomatically, which was family code for, "still single and probably always will be." The subtext was clear to everyone. Emma had prioritized her computer hobby over finding a suitable husband, and now she was approaching 30 with no prospects for either professional respectability or personal fulfillment. The kitchen conversation continued as I arranged cheese and crackers, listening to the familiar rhythm of family concern disguised as polite inquiry. These discussions happened at every gathering, with relatives taking turns expressing appropriate worry about my unconventional choices while carefully avoiding direct criticism that might seem unsupportive. "I worry that she's missing opportunities," Aunt Patricia said quietly, lowering her voice out of consideration for my proximity. "At her age, it becomes increasingly difficult to start over if those computer interests don't lead anywhere meaningful." Mom nodded thoughtfully, sharing the concern that had been growing stronger each year as my 20s progressed without obvious markers of conventional success. "We've tried to encourage her to consider more traditional options, but she's always been very independent. Sometimes too independent for her own good." The conversation reflected their genuine love and worry, filtered through assumptions about what constituted a successful life path. From their perspective, I was stubbornly pursuing dead-end interests when superior alternatives were readily available through Marcus's professional network. As we moved into the living room for the pre-dinner social hour, I found myself positioned in my usual spot on the periphery of family attention. Marcus occupied the central chair near the fireplace, his wife Jennifer beside him discussing their upcoming vacation to Switzerland. Their 3-year-old daughter played at their feet with educational toys that promised to accelerate cognitive development through multilingual programming. "Uncle Marcus is taking us skiing in the Alps," Jennifer was explaining to the assembled relatives. "The resort has a private helicopter for accessing the best slopes. Marcus's bonus this year has been extraordinary." The conversation flowed naturally around their success, touching on private schools, investment properties, and social connections that enhanced their standing in Manhattan's financial community. This was the kind of life our parents had envisioned for both their children: traditional, impressive, and easily explained to other successful people. Jennifer's discussion of their lifestyle provided a masterclass in conventional achievement. The Swiss vacation wasn't just a luxury purchase, but a demonstration of Marcus's value to Goldman Sachs. The private school enrollment wasn't merely educational planning, but evidence of their family's rising social status. Every detail reinforced their position within established hierarchies of success. The headmaster at Riverside Prep personally called to welcome our daughter, Jennifer continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose child had been accepted to an institution with a waiting list measured in years rather than months. Apparently, her early development assessments place her in the 99th percentile for cognitive ability. I sat quietly in the corner chair that had become my designated spot at family gatherings, the location for family members who were present but not central to the evening's narrative of achievement and progress. From here, I could observe without being expected to contribute significantly to conversations about career advancement or life milestones. The positioning wasn't accidental or deliberately cruel. It reflected the natural social dynamics that emerged when successful people gathered to celebrate shared values and mutual accomplishments. Marcus belonged at the center because his achievements were comprehensible and impressive to everyone present. I belonged at the periphery because my pursuits remained mysterious and potentially meaningless. Emma, tell everyone about your computer work, Mom suggested during a brief lull in the Marcus appreciation session. Her tone was encouraging but careful, the way parents speak when trying to include children who don't quite fit the group dynamic. It's mostly technical stuff, I replied with the practiced vagueness that had served me well for years. Database management, system optimization, quantum processing applications. Pretty boring unless you're into that kind of thing. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying just enough condescension to establish the professional hierarchy between us without seeming overtly dismissive. Emma's always been more comfortable with machines than people. Some people just have different strengths, you know? His comment drew understanding nods from the adults, reinforcing their shared assumption that I'd found my appropriate niche in the technical support role that suited my personality and limitations. Not everyone could handle the pressure of high-stakes business dealings or complex client relationships. The assessment wasn't entirely wrong from their perspective. I did prefer the logical clarity of computational systems to the ambiguous social dynamics that governed most business interactions. I found satisfaction in solving technical problems that had definitive solutions rather than navigating office politics that required different skills entirely. That's wonderful that you've found something you enjoy, Aunt Patricia said with the enthusiasm typically reserved for children's hobbies. It's so important to have interests that keep you busy and engaged, even if they don't lead to traditional career paths. Her comment encapsulated the family's collective understanding of my situation. My computer work was a harmless interest that provided personal fulfillment without generating meaningful professional advancement. Like someone who enjoyed gardening or collected vintage stamps, I had found a technical hobby that suited my personality while accepting its limitations as a foundation for adult life. The gift exchange proceeded with predictable patterns that reflected established family hierarchies. Marcus and Jennifer received expensive items that acknowledged their status. Cashmere scarves from Italy, premium wine collections, jewelry from recognizable European designers. Their gifts to others were equally impressive, demonstrating both their good taste and their ability to afford generous gestures. My gifts were more practical. Books about emerging technologies, software licenses for development platforms, specialized equipment for my basement laboratory setup. The kind of presents appropriate for someone whose interests were technical rather than sophisticated, useful rather than luxurious. This looks very advanced, Dad said, examining the quantum computing textbook I'd given him, though we both knew he'd never read beyond the introduction. I'm sure it's fascinating to people who understand these complex scientific concepts. His response was typical of how family members engaged with my technical interests. They expressed appropriate appreciation while maintaining comfortable distance from subjects that exceeded their comprehension or relevance to their own lives. After dinner, as the evening wound toward its traditional conclusion, the conversation turned to family plans for the coming year. Marcus outlined his career trajectory toward managing director, explaining the political dynamics and performance metrics that would determine his advancement timeline. Jennifer discussed their daughter's enrollment in an exclusive preschool that would position her for eventual admission to elite private schools. Various relatives shared updates about promotions, real estate purchases, and social achievements that marked their continued progress along conventional paths to success. Uncle Robert's construction company had secured contracts for 3 major commercial developments. Aunt Patricia had been featured in Architectural Digest for her work on a celebrity client's estate renovation. "What about you, Emma?" Cousin Sarah asked when the conversation eventually reached my corner of the room. "Any big plans for next year?" Sarah was 2 years older than me and had recently been promoted to senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 consumer goods company. Her career trajectory represented exactly the kind of steady corporate advancement that our family considered appropriate for intelligent young women. Measurable progress, impressive titles, clear advancement opportunities. Before I could respond to her question, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and recognized the caller as important enough to interrupt family time, excusing himself to take what was obviously a significant business conversation. "I'm working on some interesting projects," I said carefully, using language vague enough to avoid technical explanations that would lose my audience's attention. "Still early stages, but potentially significant applications." The response was met with polite but skeptical attention. After years of hearing about my interesting projects that never seemed to result in conventional success markers, the family had developed patient tolerance for my technical optimism combined with realistic expectations about actual outcomes. "That's wonderful," Mom said encouragingly. "Just remember that it's okay to be satisfied with what you have. Not everyone needs to achieve extraordinary things to have a meaningful life." Her words were intended as comfort, offering permission to accept modest achievements rather than pursuing unrealistic ambitions. But they stung precisely because they revealed how completely my family had written off any possibility of significant success in my future. The comment reflected years of conversations where they'd encouraged me to be realistic about my prospects and accept help from people who understood how business actually worked. Their concern was genuine, motivated by love and worry about my refusal to pursue conventional paths that led to measurable security. Marcus returned from his phone call with an expression of professional satisfaction, settling back into his central chair with the confidence of someone whose importance had just been confirmed by external validation. "Sorry about that," he said, addressing the room with practiced humility. "Year-end business never stops, even on Christmas. The global markets don't recognize American holidays." "Was it important?" Dad asked, his tone conveying genuine interest in Marcus's professional responsibilities and their international scope. "Just confirming some details for next week's board presentation," Marcus replied casually, his tone suggesting that board presentations were routine aspects of his professional life. "We're announcing a major expansion into emerging markets. Should be good for another promotion cycle." The conversation resumed its focus on Marcus's career trajectory, with relatives asking detailed questions about his responsibilities, achievements, and future prospects. This was the kind of success story that made sense to everyone. Clear progression, impressive titles, measurable financial rewards, respect from colleagues and superiors. As the evening progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly isolated from the family's shared understanding of what constituted a meaningful life. While they celebrated conventional achievements and traditional milestones, I was building something they couldn't comprehend or appreciate. The disconnect had grown wider each year, creating a gulf between my actual accomplishments and their perception of my ongoing failure to launch a proper adult life. "You know, Emma," Marcus said during a brief private moment as we cleaned up dessert plates in the kitchen, "it's not too late to consider a more traditional career path. I could probably get you an entry-level position at Goldman, maybe in the technology support division. Nothing glamorous but steady work with good benefits." His offer was genuinely meant to be helpful, reflecting his sincere belief that I needed rescue from my dead-end technical pursuits. In his worldview, any job at a prestigious financial firm was superior to whatever computer-related activities were occupying my time in our parents' basement. "The technology support division handles all the computational infrastructure for our trading operations," he continued, warming to the subject. "It's actually quite sophisticated work and they're always looking for people with advanced technical skills. You'd be perfect for that kind of role." His assessment revealed how he understood my capabilities. Technically competent but lacking the strategic thinking and interpersonal skills necessary for client-facing or leadership positions. I could contribute meaningfully in a support capacity while leaving business decisions to people with appropriate training and temperament. "Thanks," I replied quietly, maintaining the appreciative tone expected when family members offered career assistance. "I'll think about that." But as I watched him return to his central position in the family's attention, I realized how completely our paths had diverged. While he was climbing a ladder that everyone could see and measure, I was building something that existed entirely outside their frame of reference. The moment that crystallized everything came near the end of the evening, as relatives were gathering coats and preparing to leave. Cousin Sarah was discussing her job search, having recently been laid off from her marketing position despite strong performance reviews, when the conversation turned to family support networks and career advice. "It must be nice to have Marcus as a brother," she said to me, her voice carrying a note of envy disguised as observation. "Having someone successful in the family who can open doors and make connections. Not everyone has that kind of advantage." Before I could respond, Marcus laughed and shook his head with the confidence of someone whose advice had been consistently ignored. "I don't think Emma's interested in the kind of help I could provide. She's more comfortable doing her own thing, even if it means staying at entry level forever." The comment hung in the air, carrying years of accumulated frustration with my refusal to accept his guidance or follow his example of conventional professional advancement. From his perspective, I was stubbornly pursuing a dead-end path when superior alternatives were readily available through his professional network. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice taking on the sharper tone that indicated she'd been drinking just enough wine to speak more freely than usual, "I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking." The room grew quiet as relatives sensed that the evening's polite conversational boundaries were about to be crossed. Sarah positioned herself near the center of the living room, commanding attention with the confidence of someone who believed she was speaking for the group's collective wisdom. "Emma, you're becoming an embarrassment to this family," she announced, her words cutting through the holiday pleasantries like a blade through silk. "You're almost 30, you're still single, you're still playing with computers like a teenager, and you refuse to accept help from people who've actually succeeded in the real world." The silence that followed was heavy with agreement, even from family members who wouldn't have chosen such direct language. Sarah had articulated what many of them had been thinking but were too polite to express: that my unconventional choices reflected poorly on the family's collective judgment and social standing. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that while he wouldn't have delivered the message so bluntly, he agreed with the underlying assessment. "Finally someone said it," he added quietly, his voice carrying relief that the difficult conversation had finally been initiated. Mom looked uncomfortable with Sarah's harsh tone but didn't contradict the essential message. Dad stared at his hands, avoiding eye contact that might require him to defend choices he'd never understood. The silence from other relatives spoke volumes about their shared agreement with Sarah's brutal evaluation. "You had potential," Sarah continued, warming to her theme with the passion of someone who believed intervention was necessary. "Good grades, smart family, every advantage. But instead of building something meaningful, you've wasted 15 years on a hobby that's going nowhere. And now you're too old to start over properly." The weight of accumulated family disappointment filled the room like a heavy gas, making it difficult to breathe normally. This was the conversation that had been brewing for years, the honest assessment that everyone had been too polite to voice directly. I simply responded, "I understand," I said quietly, maintaining the calm tone that had served me through countless similar moments over the years. My response seemed to satisfy the family's need for acknowledgement of reality. Sarah nodded approvingly at my acceptance of their assessment. Marcus looked relieved that the intervention had been necessary but civil, and Mom began gathering plates with the efficiency of someone eager to restore normal holiday harmony. But before the moment could pass completely and the evening could conclude with its traditional exchange of grateful hugs and promises to stay in touch, Dad's phone rang with the distinctive tone he'd assigned to calls from work colleagues. He glanced at the screen with the apologetic expression of someone who normally didn't take business calls on Christmas, but the name displayed made him pause with recognition. The caller was important enough to justify interrupting family time, even during the holiday's final moments. "It's Richard Thompson from the Times," he announced to Mom, his voice carrying the mixture of pride and obligation that accompanied contact from his most prestigious professional relationship. Richard Thompson was Dad's most valuable media contact, a business journalist who'd interviewed him twice for articles about regional manufacturing trends and economic development initiatives. Dad considered him a crucial professional relationship and had mentioned him frequently as an example of the kind of high-level connections that enhanced one's reputation in business circles. "Dave, sorry to call on Christmas." Richard's voice was loud enough to be heard across the room as Dad answered, his professional excitement overriding holiday etiquette. "But I had to verify something for a story I'm working on. Is your daughter really the Emma Chin that Forbes just named as America's youngest billionaire?" The question hit the room like a physical force, creating a silence so complete that even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop ticking. Dad's face went through a series of expressions as his brain processed information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about his family's hierarchy and achievements. "I'm sorry, what?" Dad managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to process the impossible question. "Emma Chen, 29, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics," Richard continued, his professional excitement audible even through the phone's speaker. "Forbes released their youngest billionaire list an hour ago and she's number 1. Net worth estimated at $3.8 billion. Please tell me you can get me an exclusive interview with her." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in 30 years of family gatherings. Not the comfortable quiet of people absorbing interesting information, but the stunned, airless silence of people whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been challenged and found completely wrong. Marcus was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, his mouth slightly open as he tried to reconcile the family embarrassment sitting in the corner chair with the youngest billionaire in American business history. Sarah had gone completely pale, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized she'd just called a billionaire an embarrassment to the family. "Quantum Dynamics," Richard was saying, oblivious to the shock his call had created in our living room, "revolutionized quantum computing applications for financial modeling and data processing. The IPO last month broke every record for technology offerings. Your daughter built this from nothing in her basement lab, according to the Forbes profile." Dad was holding the phone like it might explode, his hand shaking slightly as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. The computer hobby he'd dismissed for 15 years, the technical projects he'd never understood, the dead-end pursuits that had worried the family for so long, all of it had been building toward something extraordinary that exceeded his ability to comprehend. "Dave, you still there?" Richard asked, his journalist instincts detecting the unusual silence on the other end of the call. "This is huge news. Forbes is calling her the most influential young entrepreneur of her generation. The quantum computing applications she developed are expected to transform multiple industries. Can you connect me with her?" Every pair of eyes in the room was focused on me now, their expressions cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning recognition. The family embarrassment who'd been lectured about accepting her limitations had somehow built a $3.8 billion technology empire while they'd been worrying about her failure to launch a proper career. The magnitude of their misunderstanding was becoming clear in real time. While they'd been encouraging me to accept entry-level positions and conventional paths to modest success, I'd been operating at a level of business achievement that exceeded anything any of them had ever imagined possible. "Actually," Dad said slowly, his voice still barely functional as he struggled to reconcile the phone call with his understanding of family reality, "she's right here." The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier when Sarah delivered her assessment of my failures had stopped completely. The easy confidence with which they'd discussed my shortcomings and lack of prospects had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that their understanding of the family hierarchy had been completely inverted. Marcus's phone was buzzing with notifications, his financial industry contacts apparently sending him links to the Forbes announcement that was spreading through professional networks. His face was cycling through expressions as he read updates about a company he'd never heard of, built by the sister he'd been offering entry-level positions to help rescue from her dead-end pursuits. "Emma," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is this true?" Before I could answer, Sarah's phone chimed with a news alert. Then Aunt Patricia's. Then Uncle Robert's. The Forbes announcement was spreading through their social media feeds in real time, confirming what Richard Thompson had just told Dad. The youngest billionaire in America was sitting in their living room, the same person they'd just finished explaining needed to accept her limitations and stop embarrassing the family with unrealistic ambitions. "Quantum dynamics has been my primary focus for the past 8 years," I said quietly, maintaining the same calm tone I'd used to acknowledge their earlier assessment. "The company went public last month." The implications were settling over the room like a heavy blanket that made thinking difficult. While they'd been politely tolerating my computer hobby and encouraging me to accept Marcus's offer of entry-level employment, I'd been building a technology empire that had just made me one of the wealthiest people in the country. As the full weight of the revelation settled over the Christmas gathering, I realized that strategic invisibility had served its purpose perfectly. The embarrassment to the family had just become the family's most remarkable success story.